why I'm calling them secret teachers, various people who have dipped into this body of, or more than dipped in, they created, great portions of it, and see how much of that has actually influenced the world we live in today. There's signs of it, and I don't mean in some conspiracy theory way, just in the actual things around us in the world, and how some things we don't know anything about them at all, and they should be better known, and so on and so on. So this is a motif about this kind of rejected knowledge and the adherents and the devotees of it, and the agents of it, let's say, and it's throughout most of its history, really up until this time, 1600s. It's well known. It's prestigious. It's not considered as we consider it today, woo wacky sort of crazy stuff. Isaac Newton, as everyone knows today, but it was a big surprise when we first found out. He was deeply into alchemy, Kabbalah, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And gravity was kind of sidelined,
Right.
So this stuff is there, and it makes sense. If the left brain is pulling a coup d'état, it makes sense that it would cast aspersions on all of this. It would, do a character assassination. And this is what happens, It's almost literally overnight, It goes from, Hermes Trismegistus, who's the thrice greatest Hermes, the founder of mythical founder of magic and literature and writing and science and all these kinds of things. I mean, he was considered a very important person. He was on par with Jesus at one point, and then he's completely sort of dissed and loses his prestige, and his whole science, all the occult sciences, become superstition. They become more than that. It's not even that you're wrong if you believe this. You're actually insane.
Right.
This is something that this fellow Michael Mersenne, who was a follower of Descartes, in this huge book with some unpronounceable Latin name, which I'm not even going to try. Basically, he took an axe to everything hermetic and occult and mystical and all of that. Rosicrucian, Robert Flood is somebody he goes after specifically. So I mean, it seemed to me that there is this kind of you can see it in those terms, and once I saw it in those terms, it sort of you saw it in a new way, at least to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is much of this stuff. People who know of this will know. It's not. I'm not unveiling, hidden kind of secret things. I'm asking the reader to look at it from this perspective.
Yeah, and
it's just a slight sort of angle to look at it from. But to me, it kind of makes it seem new. I can understand it now as something. Well, this is why this doesn't go away.
Yeah, I think that was what I appreciated. It was just a fresh perspective. It was immediately made sense, but it did give me a different lens to kind of view the history through, which definitely appreciate that. One question I had is this description of this process, whether it's in the brain or whether it's in the world. Ultimately, it functions in a similar way as you describe, but I drew a lot of parallels from what you talked about, both now and in the book, to Guénon's book, The Crisis of the Modern World, where he also talks about this sort of breakdown into modernism occurring at the exact same time that you talk about.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, he certainly, he sees it from the traditionalist perspective. So, I mean, it's pretty much downhill from certainly the Renaissance for him is, the nadir,
mm-hmm.
and but even earlier. But yes. I mean, but he's seeing it from this particular very, very austere traditionalist position of the true, the true tradition, which. For him, we're in the Kali Yuga now. We're in the Iron Age, so everything other than basically, I would say, Guénon and Evola, or the other followers, of that tradition. But yeah, I mean, there's similar. I mean, you can see lots of books around that talk about the breakdown. I mean, it's there. I mean, I even say in the book there's like dozens of books. I mean, the Spengler's Decline of the West.
Certainly, yeah.
You know, I mean, there's many, and the whole tone of existentialism and so on. But I mean, one of the things that Gebser said was that one of the signs of the new sort of consciousness sort of structure kind of emerging, bubbling up, as it were. I mean, it's not some kind of event, you know. It's not a singularity, and it's not a 2012 kind of thing. It's something that kind of, in a way, you can kind of see it as kind of some kind of thing rising up, it bubbles up.
So would you say it kind of
and things just start to suddenly, you know? But one of the things he said is it's going to be characterized by a change in our perception of time. And I think if he was around today, I think he would say that, you know, things like TiVo or whatever it is here, where you can watch whatever's on television whenever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when he was last writing in the early 70s, to watch something on television, you still had to be somewhere at a certain time. It would be one place at one time. Now you don't have to be anywhere. You know, you can watch any. So I mean, it's banal, but that is a real change in our way time, you know, is part of our life. And so I think there's other signs of that kind of thing. And and you know, all these books, you know, they're part of that as well. But I was going to say the other side of that is the sort of the beginning of this other structure, the integral structure, which is supposed to be a kind of recapitulation and fusion of all the earlier ones.
Wow, I have so many questions. I guess one is, do you see that Gebser's description of the integral mind is something new, or more of a return to a previous state, or is that like a false dichotomy?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what Gebser means by the integral, and he himself knew the difficulty of it, because he's trying to talk about a different kind of consciousness, but using a language based on, you know, another kind of consciousness. You know, our language is based on this mental rational. I mean, it obviously has elements of others in it. There's poetry and so on, but you know, there's certain limitations to it. So, I mean, that's why a lot of his lexicon has the prefix a. So, ahistorical, atemporal, aspatial. You know, it's kind of it's very much, in a certain way, it's not the same thing, but it's a way. I remember when I was studying philosophy years ago, I was reading deconstructionists, and people like Derrida would, like, in print, you know, on the page, would have a line going through something. So he's even trying to negate it more. But you know, this is the perennial problem in dealing with these things. It goes back, in some ways, you know, as you say, it goes back to the sort of, you know, traditional, you know, problem of talking about the ineffable. As the Hindus used to say, you know, neti neti, not this, not that. But in any case, but at the same time, I think there's enough of a kind of hint of what he's talking about to have some kind of more definite vision of it. And I don't think it's a step back, because that for him, you know, he warns about that. He warns about, you know, mistaking a kind of regression into an earlier consciousness structure for moving into the other one. And this is something that people like Ken Wilber picked up on. He has this idea of the pre-trans fallacy, which, you know, it's a good idea, and I think it's a good distinction. So, you know, yes, you could be in an altered state of consciousness, but it's not necessarily, if we're going to talk in these terms, higher consciousness. In a way, you could say it's even lower consciousness, because it's, you know, at an earlier form of it than our own rational consciousness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be beneficial to talk about some of the individuals that you write about in the book?
Yeah.
I'd like to, if you don't mind, focus on some that you highlight but are not as well known.
Okay.
Beginning with Platon, is that the correct pronunciation?
Gemistos Platon?
Yes.
Yeah, he's one of these. I mean, you know, if you don't know this history already, you know, he will appear a kind of secret character. He was this Byzantine scholar, a Platonist, and during the Renaissance, and he knew Greek, and he translated a great deal, and he knew his Aristotle. And he was sent to Florence for this conference, Florence and Ferrara, where certain decisions about the church. I forget exactly what his position in the church was. He was considered a very sage man. He wasn't actually part of the actual. He wasn't a cleric, but he was sent by the head of the Orthodox Church in Constantinople to this conference, which went on for some time. And while he was there, he lectured on Plato, and he also lectured on what was called the philosophy in a perennius, the perennial philosophy, the Priscia Theologia, sort of the primal, basic, fundamental teaching from which all other teachings. This is the same idea that Guénon I was talking about earlier, the tradition, the true tradition. And one of the people who heard him speak was Cosimo de' Medici, who was the great power broker of Florence. He was also a lover of literature, and this was the time when some of the texts of the ancients were being rediscovered. That's what the Renaissance was about. And he was very interested in Plato, and Plato hadn't been around. Plato had been lost for a millennium. So he was news, and it was very exciting to have some of that. And so, fired up by the lectures that Schemistos Platon gave about Platonism and the perennial philosophy, and he was also a great follower of Zoroaster, and these texts called the Chaldean Oracles, which were thought to have been written by Zoroaster, but turns out they weren't, but they didn't know that at the time. They believed he was, and Zoroaster was one of the ancient, great sages from the dawn of time. So fired up by these talks, Cosimo de' Medici established this Platonic Academy and put at its head this young Greek scholar named Marsilio Ficino. And he set Ficino the task of translating all the Plato that had come in. But then while Ficino was starting to do that, these other texts came in, and these were considered even more important. And they had been smuggled out of sort of Macedonia, or after Constantinople, when Constantinople fell to the Turks, and they turned out to be the Corpus Hermeticum. And these were the collection of the Hermetic writings that were supposed to be written by Hermes Trismegistus, who I mentioned earlier. And these were considered so important that Cosimo de' Medici told Ficino to, put Plato on the back burner and translate these texts first. So Platon, and those were translated, and those texts had according to the historian Francis Yates, had immense influence on the Renaissance. Many of the Renaissance artists were influenced by elements from the Hermetic writing and from Ficino's own lectures, and because he reestablished the Platonic Academy, so he gave talks, and he developed a whole kind of magic based on the Hermetic correspondences, this kind of nature magic, and drawing on influences of the stars and so on. So this was sort of Schemistos Platon's lectures on Platonism led to the Renaissance, basically, in a kind of short thumbnail sketch. So this was, one of these people who most people don't know about, but it's very important. Another thing that he brought with him from Constantinople was translations of the Greek geographer Strabo, and it was because of those translations that Christopher Columbus would be able to discover America. So we have a Greek, we have a Byzantine Platonist to thank for the discovery of America.
Fascinating.
So I mean, give that to the Masons, right?
Certainly. And
take a lot out of that.
And no story about the Renaissance, I don't think, would be complete if we didn't mention Pico, because he was a really fascinating figure in his own right.
Yeah. Well, he was